Hello everybody, welcome to the second installment of our session on offshore wind. Following the launch of our teaser and the overview video, thank you for downloading the teasers and reaching out to us with comments and queries. We have collated all of these questions today for answering them by Sidharth Jain. So I'll be jumping straight to the question. So Siddharth, the first question that we have received from a lot of developers and a lot of actors in the industry has been that what would come first? Is it the policy or is it actually the pipeline activity?
It has to be policy because policy gives confidence to developers to be able to put money on the ground and to start building the supply chain. And the policy has to be twofold. One would be requiring the roadmap that is for the development of the supply chain and the project and to meet the targets that the government has set. And secondly, it should be on the regulatory part because regulations are also very important. I'll cover both of these now. So on the policy front, the government has given a good target, a big target, which has attracted a lot of attention of a lot of people. And that target has created a lot of buzz in the market. Now the government needs to follow up on that target and bring back the roadmap as to how the target will be achieved. If not the full 30 gigawatt, even if it is 5 gigawatt, how that target needs to be achieved and how the cost reduction will happen. And if there are any local content requirements so that we can bring in development of the local industry and the local supply chain in India. The second part, which is also very important, which is not typically considered when we are discussing this with our clients, is the regulatory aspect. There are 22 agencies which are likely to be involved in giving approvals, and these approvals are sought not only in the initial phase of the project but also during the construction phase as well as in the operation phase of the project. And these agencies range from both in the central government, in the state government, as well as local authorities. That is, there are some civic agencies which also need to give approval. Right now only in principle approval has been taken, and it is not clear what is the content of that approval and what approvals are required subsequently. So in overall, any delay in any of these approvals could inhibit the timeline, which can escalate the costs a lot. And if our focus is on reducing the cost, then this regulatory clarity is also very important, not just the policy policy point that people typically look at.
So what I understand, Siddharth, you are asking is that we need a milestone-driven roadmap as well as we need a single window clearance to get things pacing through.
Definitely, otherwise it will become a big challenge to manage the timelines and to predict the cost of the project.
In line with the same question, we have received a lot of queries from the Indian developers who have a lot of opportunities on their plate right now. They want to understand when and if will offshore wind become a reality in India, and should they think about it seriously?
So offshore wind is a nascent industry, and it is right now a little bit lesser mature as compared to other technologies. So you can say that offshore wind is in the business development, project development phase, where investors who would want to kind of work on this industry need to approach it with a different mindset. That is, how do you develop the project, how do you identify the customers, how do you give the proof of concept and clarify the cost decline that is possible in the industry, what is already being seen in Europe. Whereas wind and solar in general have gone into more of a sales mode where tenders are well structured, everybody knows the value proposition, the costs have come down. So there is an automatic tender process which is running on. So it is unfair to compare offshore wind with onshore wind and onshore solar today. Having said that, the reason why developers should look at this is primarily because the huge demand that is there, and we believe that as per our analysis, which is also covered in our report, that it is not going to be possible to meet that huge demand through onshore wind and onshore solar, looking at the constraints that are there. So offshore wind would be a cleaner alternative. If newer alternatives comes, they need to also be explored, but offshore wind is a promising cleaner alternative which is getting mature in other markets. And secondly, the offshore wind market is going to be huge in India, looking at the coastline that we have. And even if you look at the two states where the maximum potential is, preliminary estimates it's around 160 gigawatt. So looking at the scale and the overall cost decline and the way the market can function, it would make sense to look into this newer developing industry, but with a different mindset as compared to solar and wind.
Mm-hmm. That is quite interesting. I think the second stakeholder and a very important stakeholder in all of this is the supply chain, and the European supply chain, who has been a part of the entire European offshore wind journey. What they want to understand is that what is the status of the supply chain in India, and is there any synergy or leveraging that can be done by the offshore wind developers who come to India?
So supply chain in India for offshore wind is not yet developed because it is still a not a mature industry. But onshore wind supply chain is fairly well developed. As per our understanding, around 10 gigawatt of local supply chain is already set up in India, which can be then upgraded to develop offshore wind capabilities. Of course, new facilities will be required to be built near the port areas where there is going to be installation, so that there is smoother transfer and if there is no road related bottleneck. Having said that, I believe that the competencies are there in the market. They need to be upgraded, and capabilities can be leveraged what have been built for the onshore wind supply chain. The second part of the supply chain is the marine and offshore supply chain. India does not have historically a large amount of offshore resource, so there is not a lot of local development of supply chain. But in the past, whenever there has been an offshore project, they have been developed in conjunction or with support of international players. So we have seen players coming up from Singapore, Dubai, even Europe and America, and setting up in India as a office, and then kind of bringing their international expertise. So supply chain wise and expertise wise, imports are allowed. There is no restriction on bringing the global supply chain in India. And as far as the latest EOI was there and the government's clear intention, there are no such local content policies so far. So if the government wants to start the industry right now with the current rules that have been framed, developers can bring in their global supply chain and leverage some of the capabilities and competencies, of course upgrading them. The only part which is absolutely missing is the port related infrastructure, because these projects are to be built near some dedicated locations. There are ports there which might be suitable only for installation purposes, but manufacturing wise and as well as operation and maintenance wise, they need to be upgraded. Similarly, if we were to develop this at a scale, then new ports would need to be developed, and that would be an emerging area where intention needs to be focused.
This is quite interesting, because when you think about India as a country and there is no development with respect to a lot of oil and gas assets, offshore especially, then you do not expect a supply chain synergy. But as you highlighted, there is a lot of leveraging that can be done by the players. So talking about the other end of the value chain and the off-taker in India, one of the major concerns that the developers have is that there is a lot of concern around the credit rating of the off-takers in India, and there is a lot of associated risk. Is there a proposition where developers can sell directly to the consumers, which are C&I, and are there any alternate revenue streams which are present in the market?
So C&I as a segment is the largest consumer of electricity in India. As per our estimates, 50% of the electricity that is consumed in India goes to the C&I sector, and that sector is also expected to grow significantly over the next 10 years. So looking at the demand side, there is no problem. And the prices at which these companies procure their power is also very attractive and can make a good business case if we look at it from a standalone perspective. But there are many charges and regulatory bottlenecks to be able to supply directly to the C&I market. Even in the onshore wind and the solar market, we do not see so many C&I orders happening in the last few years. The government's target was around 40 gigawatt. Right now, the annual installation is only in the range of 1 to 2 gigawatt, and it is still under challenge because of all these regulations as well as the charges that are put up at the local level. So if the government were to change this rule and make it a bulk procurement policy where a new technology can come in, this could work. But without that initial government support, it would not be prudent to bank on the C&I market because of the various challenges that are there. The second part is that it would make more sense to work with government, because there is inherent security in terms of the commitment that is made to honor the PPA. And to raise finance, it would be very important that the government's backing is utilized to leverage the cost of debt and the cost of equity that is required. And even if the C&I market opens, it would be much more prudent to go towards the SECI-based tenders.
I think this is very interesting. We have covered 3 stakeholders so far. We have talked about the policy, we talked about the timeline of development, we talked about the developer concerns, and we talked about the supply chain. The last piece of the puzzle is actually the financing. And the question that we received on financing is that who is responsible for it, and are there any tie-ups which have been done so far?
So if you see what is happening in the market, some green shoots are already visible. And the largest Indian companies, which are also government owned, NTPC and ONGC, have expressed their interest to partner with large international companies to explore this offshore wind sector. This would give them access to both the local resources as well as the ability to tap the global financial markets. And this coming together of large Indian companies as well as large international companies is a good signal for this market.
So that brings me to the last question, Sidharth. The question that I have is, actually there is one way which has been proposed by the government to develop offshore wind. Is there any other alternate mechanism or any alternate path of development of offshore wind in India?
So the EOI that came out wanted to set up the project in Gujarat. The primary reason for that was the off-taker in Gujarat was ready to procure this power. And this was supposed to be the first project that would come up, which would lead to increasing of scale both in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. But however, the resource conditions that have come out from the initial studies are not that as high as compared to what is there in Tamil Nadu. So there might be a shift of the project from Gujarat to Tamil Nadu because the cost of price which is discovered there would be lower. And that would also help in scaling up the industry because a lot of the supply chain internationally could be leveraged there in Tamil Nadu. The second option that the government can take up, apart from shifting it to Tamil Nadu, could be that they reduce the size of the project to match the capital that is available as a subsidy from the government of India. Those discussions might happen as soon as clarity is there as to what the budgetary allocation is there. And the third option could be to move the project from offshore location to some intertidal locations where demonstration projects can be set up in offshore, plus some work can be done intertidal, and eventually the scale can be built up. So if the first EOI, which is leading to 1 gigawatt tender, does not come across, so there could be 2 to 3 other mechanisms in which this industry can kick off. Of course, the key is that how the supply chain is set up in India, how the cost trajectory is going to be, and how the local government resources support that.
Thank you, Sidharth. I think this has been extremely interesting and hope it is insightful for some of the listeners as well, and hope we have been able to answer some of your queries. Do reach out to us if you have any additional questions on info@MEC Intelligence. We'll be shortly doing another webinar on offshore wind in India, and we'll be publishing the registration link on our website soon. Thank you and take care. Stay safe.